So deeply insecure am I. Sometimes I need to go away and fact check all of my maths, all of my F1 theses to make sure that they stand up to the light of truth. And maybe I might have been barking up the wrong tree as far as all this Maximilian Verstappen glaze. Of course, Max is good. Don't get it twisted. But the greatest of all time. And again, we need to define those terms and parameters within which we have this conversation at the outset. Greatest isn't just the best. There is longevity in there. Of course, you've got to factor in how bright somebody's flame burns. Can they do things that nobody else in the car has ever done? And Maximilian Verstappen ticks all of those boxes. But naysayers will say that there are circumstances in that Red Bull have built an RB21 for the longest time that only Maximilian Verstappen can drive. Lest we forget, in 2022, when it was Checo Perez's time, when the car was understeering, it looked for a while there like Checo can hang with Maximilian Verstappen forcing into a five-time champion. Just for a while. But then when you speak to all of the F1 aficionados, they will say that the greatest ones get the greatest out of themselves when they have an oversteery handling dynamic for a car. It was the same with Michael Schumacher. It was the same too with Senna. That they have this uncanny ability to manipulate the car in and on around the limits of adhesion. That's why you see in 2022... Checo Perez starts to hang with one Maximilian Verstappen. The naysayers will say, well, surely then that shows you all that you need to know. That Red Bull have done what we thought they've done, that they built a car that only Maximilian Verstappen can drive. Well, yes and no. To a greater or lesser extent, they might be onto something there. Let's take a look at these numbers. I saw this on F1 Reddit and I thought that I would bring it to the congregation and submit it to a jury of my F1 peers. Take a look at this, again, courtesy of Polish Michael over at F1 Reddit. The gap between Maximilian Verstappen in 2024 and Checo Perez on average in quali pace, 0.543%. The only set of teammates where there was a bigger gap was over at Sauber Kick between Bottas and rookie settings as Zhou Guanyu. 0.54 for the avoidance of doubt in a story told intent is a chasm. That's gargantuan. Massive settings as a quantum. You can't even justify it. For Checo Perez was once upon a time the Mexican Ministry of Defense. He can drive a car, therefore. But it gets worse, ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury, because when you take a look at this next slide, look at this. 0.54 or 0.543 was Checo Perez's gap, right? Maximilian Verstappen versus Tsunoda-san, 0.781, as near as makes no difference, 0.8% in super times. That's chaos, chat. Tsunoda-san came into this job on a wave. Everybody thought he was the one, that he can control the car, that if anybody could tame themselves an RB21 of a fire-breathing dragon, he had a name, and his name was Tsunoda-san. But take a look at the gap between Liam Lawson, because it's same thing again, right? I feel like we've read this book a multitude of times before. Liam Lawson was mentioned in the next one. The dude who could manipulate the snap oversteery handling dynamic of an RB21 in the same way that Maximilian Verstappen can. 0.9% in super times terms. That's the difference. Ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury, that is chaos. And if we take a step back from the F1 wood to see the F1 trees, Alex Albon spoke to this exact same thing not long ago on the High Performance podcast. He said that the handling dynamic of the Red Bull when he was in it gave him anxiety, that it was as if you were using a mouse on the PC with the settings at 2017. It was chaos. And then you end up chasing your tail, chasing a handling dynamic, a car that doesn't suit you, and then in come the mistakes. Maybe then, Alex Albon et al., maybe the naysayers about Maximilian Verstappen have a point. Maybe the circumstances at Red Bull are so favourable that Maximilian Verstappen can do nothing but win. But then sometimes you've got to take a step back again and look at the orgy of evidence that speaks to the contrary. Pierre Gasly came out over the last 24 hours, and he's been talking about this. This is the Red Bull teammates, the revenge of them. Here's what Pierre Gasly had to say, because I thought this was interesting. In the off season, or the mini break even, I've been going back and watching some Maximilian Verstappen highlights, again with insecurity as a central tenet, with a view to check my F1 maths. Here's what Pierre Gasly said recently. To be fair, I think we all get put in the same bracket as far as ex-Red Bull racing drivers, former teammates of Maximilian Verstappen when it comes to that second car. Quote, but to me, things were very different to me than they were for Alex Albon or than they are for Checo Perez. I'm not going to elaborate too much on that tinfoil hat settings, conspiratorial settings from Pierre Gasly. He continues, quote, clearly something is not clicking for Yuki. I just hope for him that as a friend, somehow it comes together because the levels are there on the grid. You know everybody is capable of doing it. It just doesn't seem right. Is Pierre Gasly leaning into this conspiratorial stuff? That Maximilian Verstappen has a foot up, that there is such a thing as Maximilian Verstappen privilege at Red Bull by dint of the way that the car handles and the way that they've developed. Pierre Gasly continues. And he's talking about Max to Mercedes now. Are you surprised, Pierre Gasly? And here's where it gets techie. And we start to lean into the first-hand evidence. People characterising who Maximilian Verstappen is as an F1 driver. Pierre Gasly says, I'm not surprised about the talks, the rumour of Maximilian Verstappen going across to work with Toto Wolff. I'm not surprised. Not really. Max, he says, is arguably the best driver of the grid. Any driver that wants the best car available, and that's not what he gets at the moment. I think it's normal that he'd be looking at his options and looking for what's possible. At the end of the day, he's a four-time world champion. It's down to him. Whatever he wants to do, I guess he'll find out pretty soon. The piece of that stanza that I want you to pay attention to, notwithstanding Pierre Gasly putting on his tinfoil hat, is this. Max arguably is the best driver on the grid. Oh, the humanity. And in comes the evidence. That's not the first bit. That's Exhibit A, ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury. Buckle in, because it's going to get techie here on in. You'll recall, Franz Tost said that he thinks Maximilian Verstappen is worth anywhere between 2 and 3 tenths on all the other 19 on the grid. And if you need further evidence, just go back and watch 2021. For however that season ended, there was brilliance in there. Maximilian Verstappen's flame, as near as every single weekend, burned very bright, brighter, one might argue, than any other F1 driver in history. I am reminded, Shez of the Shakedown, a greater, go-tier F1 mind than I ever will be, said that if Maximilian Verstappen retired at the end of 2021, you would still have to put him on the Mount Rushmore of F1, first round Hall of Fame settings. That's how good Maximilian Verstappen was in 2021 at the age of 23. What are we doing here, chat? And then fast forward. You think Toto would sacrifice George Russell at the altar of Maximilian Verstappen if he didn't think he was that good? If he didn't think it was worth it? If he didn't think the Max Verstappen juice was worth the Max Verstappen squeeze? You bet your bottom dollar. And then rewind ever so slightly as I build myself a case for Maximilian Verstappen. In 2015, it was Carlos Sainz and it was Maximilian Verstappen. His maiden voyage in Formula One in that Toro Rosso car didn't work out well. Carlos Sainz ended up leaving him, potentially fearing and feeling that Max Verstappen, that they were building that team in his image. There was incidents around Monaco where Jos Verstappen got involved, as he always has done, and said he's a young boy, he's a rookie, this is his maiden voyage. Don't put undue pressure upon him. Franz Tost says, we act as a team. These lot take their orders from me. Marco said, no, you take your orders from me, team, and if you get sacked, I will get you another job at the big team, no longer Toro Rosso, at Oracle Red Bull Racing. So Carlos Sainz will know. He'll be acutely aware of the circumstance that Maximilian Verstappen comes with. Some are arguing that Mercedes don't need that sometimes disharmony, the downside that comes with, more than outweighs and offsets the upside of the performance that Maximilian Verstappen epitomises. But Carlos Sainz Jr. has gone on a podcast, the High Performance Podcast, and he's spoken quite directly to it, in and amongst other things, the battle, the beef between him and Charles Leclerc, the Scuderia Ferrari circumstance, him getting sacked at the altar of one Sir Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton. But of course, he had to talk about Maximilian Verstappen as well, right? Surely, Carlos, if he is more acutely aware of this circumstance than most, that he's going to drop the truth bars. He's going to tell us what Maximilian Verstappen is truly worth, right? Or not, as the case may be. Roll the clip.
Challenges of driving in that team. Like, it doesn't mean that just because you'd have gone there and it's a fast car, everything would have been perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
no, exactly. I think everyone's having a really tough time being Max's teammate. I can only say that when I was Max's teammate, I didn't have this tough time. I was obviously incredibly surprised with how quick he was, with how he's an insane driver. I mean, he's going to go out to be one of the best ever in history if he's not already the best ever in history.
Those, ladies and gentlemen, are the terms in which we need to have this conversation. That's Carlos Sainz Jr., more acutely aware of the circumstance that is Maximilian Verstappen, because they both drove their maiden season together in Toro Rosso. He was the one now saying that Maximilian Verstappen, when all is said and done, will potentially go down as the best driver in F1 history. Now the naysayers, what are you going to say? The evidence is too much now, too broad, too great in length and depth to naysay anymore. Maximilian Verstappen, listen, this is a conversation, an argument, a debate, a mute even, that will have in millimeters, not yards, because it's always going to be close. You'll throw Lewis's hat in the arena, of course. Longevity setting, 7-time champion, multitudinous championships. So too Michael, so too Ayrton Senna. Fangio, you can talk about Alain Prost too. But you bet your bottom dollar at this stage, given what Maximilian Verstappen has done at this very early, in inverted commas, stage of his career, the way that his peers talk about him, Pierre Gasly over the past 24 hours, now Carlos Sainz Jr., Alex Albon previous to that, Franz Tost previous to that, Toto the boy who cried wolf, desperate to kick in the chest of King George Russell to get his hands on a Maximilian Verstappen. You bet your bottom dollar that Max has, his name must be in the argument, lest we want to deem ourselves abbots of reason as far as F1 is concerned. Now, I say all of this to say this. The context as far as the Mercedes conversations ongoing with Maximilian Verstappen needs to be viewed in these terms. The dude is a generational talent. You've seen me lose my mind a gazillion times, and not for nothing, by the way, chat. This is all because he has no chance of putting it on pole in Suzuka. 18-1 the bookmakers had him. So don't let the revisionist historians tell you about, well, the RB21 is a rocket ship. It would have to be for Max Verstappen to put it on pole, because the experts of the forensic F1 variety, the dudes, the guys and girls who make their money out of this sort of stuff, wagers, thought that he had zero chance. Similarly, around the British Grand Prix qualifying, no chance, ladies and gentlemen. 13% of the time they had Maximilian Verstappen dropping it on pole. Why? Because his car was rubbish. McLaren had the whip hand. He's not beating to pole any 2-bit jockeys. This is Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, both of whom, when they've had their Weetabix, are not bad peddlers, and yet and still Maximilian Verstappen does what he does best and extracts the greatest out of himself in the moments when it matters most. This is going to be a conversation ongoing. Anytime you say the greatest and you're talking about Formula One, well, that's the conversation for the night, right? Some will say Lewis, some will say Senna, some will say Prost, some will say Fangio, some will say Clark, but you better bet your bottom dollar, lest you want to be deemed an abbot of unreason, against the backdrop of Gasly saying what he said, Carlos Sainz now coming out and saying what he said on the High Performance podcast, the way that Toto views Maximilian Verstappen and the upside that he comes with. You bet your bottom dollar that you need to put Maximilian Verstappen in that conversation, lest you wish to be deemed definitively an abbot of unreason. What are we doing?